Hello, everybody. Happy holidays, and welcome to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and this is the show for the unsung heroes of education. If this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you to the show, and we hope that you enjoy tonight's episode. If you are a returning person tuning in, welcome back, and I also hope that you enjoy tonight's content. So before we introduce our guest for tonight, just want to let people know that really soon there will be some sales going on at the Identity Talk Apparel shop. So make sure you check us out at teesprings.com/stores/the Identity Talk Apparel shop. We have hoodies, t-shirts, and all kinds of accessories to get your swag up during the holiday season. And then finally, for anybody who's looking to get some professional development credits towards their teacher license, we have the Identity Talk Virtual School, which is available on Teachable. We have our two main courses, Shape to Teach Identity 101 and the Spell course, which stands for the Self-Publishing Educators Learning Lab. So anybody who is interested in starting a book and learning about the self-publishing process, that is the course for you. And for those who are looking to just develop their practice and learn about anything from culturally responsive teaching practices to how to develop your teacher identity to have longevity in the profession, Shape to Teach Identity 101 is that course for you. So make sure you check us out on Teachable and to check us out at calendly.com/Identity Talk for Educators to book a call. All right. Now off to the main event. So tonight, we're going to be talking about self-care and restorative practices, as well as this idea of mindfulness. So as teachers, we're so mindful of others. We have to think about our students. We have to think about our parents. We have to think about our colleagues. Like, we're responsible for occupying our mental space with so many different individuals that we fail to be mindful about ourselves, if that makes any sense. But I have somebody who's going to come on the show who is a certified high school science teacher, but she has now gone on to do some facilitation around mindfulness and self-care and trauma-informed practices. And she is the founder of the Thriving Teacher Project, which is based in New York. And without further ado, I want to bring on our guest for tonight, Maria Tan, to just share with us about her journey into mindfulness and some of the great work she's doing through her organization. So let's bring Maria on. Hey, Maria.
Hey, Kwame. Thank you for having me on.
What is going on? How are we feeling?
We're feeling good. We're feeling good. Excited to be here. Also grateful for you and this opportunity.
Yes. And I think having you on the show tonight is just perfect timing, because when we think about the fact that it's December and we're closing out 2020, this is the time for us to be mindful and to be reflective about everything from just our professional practice, but also where we are personally, doing those are we doing those personal audits to kind of see, where we are. So before we get into all that conversation, I do want to give you a chance to just share with us a little bit about yourself and how you got into education.
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually earned my first degree in chemistry, and most people don't know that about me, but I have my bachelor's degree in chemistry. And I started working in industry after college, and I realized it really wasn't resonating with me or who I was or who I wanted to be. And I felt like I didn't fit in. And it wasn't fulfilling in any way. So a friend at that time was just finishing up the New York City Teaching Fellows program and would tell me about it all the time, and it inspired me to think about teaching again, which is something that I was interested in when I first started college. So I started playing around with the idea of teaching and teaching high school, and then reflecting on my own education experience and realizing that my whole life, my parents worked extremely hard and sacrificed so many things. My mom had 2 jobs for most of my life to just be able to send me and my brothers to Catholic school for what we thought was a good education. And it was a good education, and I'm super grateful. But I became really present and aware of how unfair that was,
Right.
and how I really wanted to change that. That you didn't have to sacrifice so much or have a lot of money in order to have a good education. So I chose to pursue New York City Teaching Fellows, which I love that program, really grateful for that. And yeah, and then I taught in the Bronx for 5 years.
Right. And during your time in the Bronx, what was that experience like? Because I know you were teaching high school science, so I'm assuming it was chemistry that you were teaching all 5 of those years.
Yeah, I actually taught chemistry, biology, and IB biology, which is sort of like AP, like a higher level biology. And I taught all grades, 9 through 12. There was one year I taught 9, 10, 11, and 12, and was also teaching 3 different subjects.
Wow.
So it was a lot. It was a lot, but I also learned a lot. And I cultivated a lot of compassion during those years.
Right. And for our non-education folks, IB stands for International Baccalaureate, which is a program that is very common in the international circuit. So when you go to a lot of international schools, they have IB programs. And I think in the US it's starting to catch on a little bit more, but it's not something that's common yet uh,
Right,
in
right.
our education circles. So, I just try to educate our non-educator folks who happen to pop on from time to time.
Yeah, thank you for that. You
No,
have to
no,
be mindful of my use of acronyms.
but that's education though.
I know.
We live in acronyms.
I know. It's a love-hate relationship.
Nah, for real. But so now you're teaching high school science, you're teaching IB chemistry, you're teaching biology, and then there are certain things that are going on within your school at the time that really got you thinking about taking a different path, which turned out to be restorative practices and then eventually into mindfulness. So if you could just share with the audience maybe a particular moment, or was there an experience that really ignited you to, get into that journey of mindfulness?
Yeah. Um, Thank you for naming it as a journey, because it definitely was. And it started as a personal journey first. I have a colleague who's also a best friend of mine who encouraged me to start doing yoga with her regularly, and to cope with the stress of the job and some personal things I was dealing with. And after about a year of like consistent practice, I actually for the first time started to notice myself slow down. And I remember I could see myself slowing down walking to work, whereas otherwise in the past I'd be rushing, I'd be trying to multitask, just brain like so hectic. And I saw myself slow down in the classroom too. I saw myself pause before speaking, pause before responding, and I just got really in tune to that. And I realized, I want to explore more meditation and more mindfulness. And then I started my own personal practice with that. And there was another colleague at my school at the time who was using a sound bell in her class to practice mindfulness, which really inspired me. So her, I, and then my colleague who was getting me into yoga, we all got together and we started to plan out this week-long expedition on mindfulness. So at my school, because it's a pro school, we're able to do like week-long field trips. So the theme of ours was wellness, mindfulness, and yoga. And we took students to different yoga studios. We took them to mindfulness studios. They went to a sound bath one year. And there was just so much positive feedback from the students that I realized it was something that I wanted to do on a more consistent basis. So I went and I took a few courses at mindful schools. And then I just chose to do it one year. And I remember before that school year started, like in September, I was nervous because it was something new for me. So I put a slide deck in my PowerPoint that said mindful minute, and it had this little circle that would expand and it would say inhale, and then it would contract and say exhale.
Oh, wow.
I told myself, if I put it in the slide, I'm definitely going to do it. So I did it that first day, and then I practiced mindfulness with my students every single class, every single day without fail, unless I was absent, of course. And it's something that they really benefited from. And there's so many anecdotes that I could tell you and share with you, but I really saw the impact it was having on students and their ability to control their own emotions, to actually be in touch with their emotions and to control their own ways of reactivity. And it's just something that's really transformed my teaching. And when I started to access that level of education, I like to say that's when I actually felt like I was a teacher. Like I truly felt like an educator when I started to really connect with students on that level. So I started to branch out too. And I went and I got trained in restorative circles and then brought those practices back to my school. And I was also part of the equity team at my school. So it kind of started there, and it just organically like helped me branch out.
Right. So when you started your mindfulness journey and then you started to branch into restorative practices and you brought it back to your school, what was the initial reception from your administration when you started to bring these practices, into the building?
Yeah. With mindfulness, there was a positive response. People were like, that's cool, do your thing. And then with the restorative practices, I actually like requested that my principal come with me and train with me, because it was something that we were doing at our school, but no one was trained in it and we weren't training the teachers in it. It was more so like, okay, here's an email and go try this thing. So I just saw that there was a disconnect there, and then there was an opportunity that came up to train for it. So yeah, I basically just had my principal come with me. So she was on board with bringing it back to our school and helping train the staff in those practices.
No, and that's wonderful because that's not always the reception that you'll get from your school leaders. There are some that will tell others, okay, I need you to go to this training on restorative practices. At least that was the case in my situation. But then they themselves aren't going to those trainings with you.
Right.
And then you find yourself frustrated because you're in these workshops trying to learn about these different practices, and you see principals from other schools with their staff learning together. And then you just start to wish that was your situation.
Right. Yeah, I'm grateful that my administration was usually really supportive of ideas that I had and, willing to engage and just really open. So I am really grateful for that. But I definitely do feel that tension also of just kind of like, the expectation versus like what's actually happening behind the scenes. So yeah, I understand what you mean.
Right. And I want to stay on that for a second because as we've already mentioned, not every school or staff is going to be open arms about this idea of mindfulness or restorative practices. So I want to know from you, what are some measures that schools and educators can take to center these practices in their daily operation and to eventually get them to buy in and invest in this?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, and my view on that is it always has to start with you. And it has to be something that you truly embody, and others can actually see that you embody that. Because I think if you're trying to bring something to your school that you haven't tried yourself, there's really no backing to it. And I think people can see that right away. But yeah, like starting with yourself, and where I came from a school where these practices weren't centered. And I acknowledge that there was some effort to bring it onto the scene and to introduce people to it. And it really became like a hot topic at the end of the 2019-2020 school year, with COVID. But like the once a year PDs are not enough. And sometimes I think schools feel like that's sufficient to talk about it once and then like, okay, you're gonna go and do these things, but it really has to be a practice. So I would recommend, like, if you're at a school and this is something that you want to start, to team up with teachers who are also interested in this, who are also committed to bringing these practices to your school, and create, find solidarity in that, and then together as a group really do your research, know what you're talking about, and then advocate for it to your administration and to the rest of your colleagues to really have that backing behind you. And if your school doesn't offer a training, like, go get trained and actually come back and have the skill set. And also, when you're doing these trainings, when you're doing this work, especially trauma-informed work, to look at that trauma through the lens of yourself as well. And to really have that work be personal for you, and to investigate, like, how trauma shows up in you. How are you relating to situations? How are you responding or reacting to people? Really embody that work within yourself as much as you can too. And when you actually have that authentic way of approaching it, you can really connect with your students and with your staff on a real level about it.
No, and all that is very true. So you mentioned that schools and educators should research these practices. So are there any books or are there any programs that you could recommend outside of course, Thriving Teacher Project, which we're going to talk about very shortly? But what were some of the go-to resources that you looked at as you were going through your journey in the beginning?
Yeah, I highly recommend Morningside Center. That's where I had my restorative justice training, and they're affiliated with Columbia. There's also RJOY, which is Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. That's out in California, but they do have, like, online offerings. And two books that I would say were really helpful in me researching that would be Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond, and Mindful of Race by Ruth King. And really, like, if you're going to go outside of your school and find these communities, it's really important to find communities that resonate with you, so that when you're doing the work, it's, again, like, true and authentic for you.
No, absolutely. Because when we go into these different schools, we're in these communities and we are responsible for understanding what's transpiring in these communities, because that's the trauma that a lot of our students bring into the school. And that doesn't mean that you have to do a home visit every day, but you have to find a way to get yourself in tune to what's going on. So I could totally resonate with that part.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only just recognizing the signs of trauma, but also, like, understanding how it develops in the brain, where it comes from. It comes from our childhood, and understanding that everyone has trauma. It's not just your kids are traumatized, your students are traumatized, like, you're carrying around trauma too. I think that's really important to acknowledge.
No, for sure, for sure. And I think when you think about this concept of therapy, it's something that is not really popular in communities of color.
Mm-hmm.
And but I also feel like it's something that we need to bring into our schools. So when you look at the way budgets are set up and the money's allocated, we have to find a way to get more therapists and more social workers, into our school districts, because it just doesn't make sense for them to be always among the first that are cut when layoffs happen. So I think it's something that we have to change.
Right. And that idea that you said about therapy, recently I've been talking with my mentor, and he was describing how, therapy is, one, you have to find a therapist that you resonate with. Two, it's really expensive. 3, then you have to have like 5 sessions until you're comfortable enough to really speak to your therapist. So in what's becoming more popular, or what he believes is going to be more popular, is the setting of group therapy, and actually restorative circles as a form of group therapy and as a form of healing, which I think is really promising.
Right. And when we look at what's going on with COVID-19, you have a lot of people now. There's been an uptick, with therapy sessions. A lot of people now are getting therapy, and a large sector of those people are folks who are reluctant to get it pre-COVID. So it's amazing how, these unprecedented times has led to folks coming to the realization that, all right, I need to get this mind work together. I need to start addressing some of these inner demons, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I think is honestly a plus side of everything that's happened this year.
No, for sure.
Yeah, a lot of people doing that inner work.
Yeah, and myself included. Like, I'm in the process of trying to find a therapist for myself because I'm realizing now that I need it. And especially, as a father, you start to realize how some of your own kind of inner demons and some of the things that you've left unaddressed all these years start to manifest itself in different parts of your own life.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes just subconsciously.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So no, it's something that we all should really consider, especially now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that helps to sort of like destigmatize the mental health in the community.
Oh no, absolutely. I've seen a lot of my friends, have therapists now. So I mean, I know this is something that's a growing trend, not just within our community, but in other communities as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Thriving Teacher Project. So it's still very new, but you've already done so much with it, in this short period of time. So I want to give you a chance to just share to the audience what ultimately inspired you to start, this project, and what's the overarching mission of it.
Yeah, so it actually started as a mindfulness initiative at my school, which was inspired by an event. So you can picture first lockdown, April 2020, the peak of COVID. Things are really, really wild for the world and for schools. And, as teachers, we had to completely turn around our curriculum in like 6 days to create everything to be online. And it was just a lot. And one of my really good friends and colleagues, actually, she had a panic attack on a Zoom meeting for the first time and just froze, couldn't conduct the meeting. And she told me about it. And I said, like, what supports do you have? And I realized that there really was no support for teachers during this time. And it was more so like, everything is urgent. You have to get this done. We need this by here. And just, it was a lot of pressure. So I offered for her, we can start doing mindfulness sessions together just over Zoom. And I started doing them twice a week. And other staff members came, and I did that until the end of the year. And I started doing mindfulness on our school's Instagram with students. I would go Instagram live every day with my students. And I just realized that there was a real need to support teachers and students emotionally, especially going into our next school year. So I started to advocate to my administration that we make mindfulness a wider school initiative, and we start to really allocate our energy and resources towards SEL and trauma-informed practices. And like I said, my administration is really supportive, and I had a lot of yes buts. So yes, we need you to do this. Yes, it's really important, but there's no time in the schedule, but there's no funding for this. So eventually I just hit so many roadblocks that I chose to take my momentum and then just create this project. outside of my school, which I'm grateful that I did, because now I'm reaching educators across the country. And the overarching mission of the project is to create healing spaces for educators. And when I say healing spaces, when I started to really think about what that meant, it's really simple, actually, which is just allowing teachers to be heard, to be seen, and to be in community, and to really just bear witness to each other. And in doing that process, our experiences, learn self-care, build community, connect with each other, to ultimately thrive in the challenging times that we find ourselves in.
No, and that's just great, man. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking about how sometimes the greatest ideas come when we're in these moments of adversity. Like they just manifest themselves that way. And look at how it's starting to blossom, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us some of the different services that the Thriving Teacher Project provides currently.
Yeah, absolutely. Currently, the format is each month we're offering what I'm calling master classes. And these master classes feature an expert in the field of mindfulness, heartfulness, emotional intelligence, trauma-informed practices, anti-racist, anti-bias practices, joy. We have an expert on joy coming on to our master classes. And this is really for people to connect with someone in one of those fields and to learn tools for self-care and tools to sustain themselves. And then after the master class, we have 2 follow-up community support groups where it's hosted by teachers for teachers, and the format is a restorative circle. And that's where teachers get to connect and share with each other. And I think that's really the heart of the project too, is just having educators connect and be able to, again, be heard, be seen, process their experiences.
Right. And I'm starting to see that it's having an impact on teachers. I just flashed a comment from Jamie and I'll flash it again. So
yeah, I couldn't read it. It was really long.
Yeah, so it says the Thriving Teacher Project is a must for all teachers. It's rejuvenating, re-energizing, and inspiring. It has made this year more sustainable and beneficial to me and my students. So the impact is already starting to show, in different educators.
Yeah. Jamie's actually one of my former colleagues, and she did the restorative justice training with me, and we're really tight. So I appreciate you being here, Jamie.
No, but it's great to have friends like that, who are going to support you for sure. Mm-hmm. So as you were describing the master classes, you were talking about anti-racist and anti-bias practices. And when I think about, mindfulness, you can't help but intersect mindfulness with culture responsive teaching and anti-bias, anti-racist practices. Mm-hmm. So I want to hear your thoughts on the role that mindfulness plays in helping schools build their capacity in culture responsive and anti-bias, anti-racist practices.
Yeah. I think it's important to acknowledge that mindfulness isn't a solution, but rather a tool, and a tool to be able to engage in more difficult conversations, to engage in the exploration of these topics, and really to build your own sustainability in relation to these things. And you can only really truly tackle or transform these oppressive systems when you have an awareness of what's going on. And not just an awareness like that it's there, but you actually understand your own relation to it as well, and you're mindful of that. Or maybe you're aware of your lack of relation to it, so your numbness to it. It's so important to name, and it supports you in slowing down, and this can then extend to your relationships with your students. It can extend to your relationships with your staff and how you're interacting with them, and really create the conditions for that coherence between you and your environment. And then you're able to really actually, have an impact, and it can sustain you also to so that it doesn't feel like such an uphill battle, and
Right.
so a journey towards somewhere. Because I think a lot of times it's really easy to burn out when you're fighting for these things.
Right. And I think that's just the nature of trauma. And when we think about just the anti-racist part, you think about just communities of color, particularly, Black and Latinx communities, they are born into trauma. When you think about just the history, of the people and what they've had to transpire and what we still have to, overcome as a result. So the trauma comes in different layers as you progress through life. And then we find ourselves trying to develop these compensatory strategies to deal with the trauma. But in the process, they end up being counterproductive. That makes sense.
Yeah. I think even saying like deal with the trauma kind of speaks to that. Like, oh, I got to deal with this. I got to fix this. But really it's like, how can we actually just like look at it? How can we hold the trauma, and learn from it and like slowly release it? I think mindfulness really beautifully supports that.
Right. And I think, and I want to hear from you on this. Do you believe that it's a struggle for educators in general to practice mindfulness because we're already overburdened with so many responsibilities and we're trying to make sure that everybody else is okay at the expense of our own health?
Yeah, definitely. I've talked to so many educators about this specific question, and it's like a lot of what I hear is like, I don't even know where to start. I don't even have time to start, So it really takes a commitment, and I think if you're gonna engage in this, to really look at your why, and are you doing this from a place of, I want to practice mindfulness so I can use it for my students so that they're more quiet? Or are you practicing mindfulness to have that sort of level of self-transformation? Because also these things like mindfulness, trauma-informed practices, social emotional learning and tools, if they're not used with integrity, they can actually do more harm than they can help.
Right. And I think that's part of the problem because not a lot of teachers, but there are some teachers out there who look at these different practices and they view them as prescriptions as opposed to subscriptions, if that makes sense, right? Like they think, okay, this is going to be a quick fix. Give me the tools, and that's going to get my children to be quiet. That's going to get my children to start listening to me. During virtual learning. That's going to be the remedy to all my problems. But it's an investment. It's an emotional investment. It's a mental investment. It's a psychological investment. And I think that's what gets lost in the process.
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking of like, what popped in my mind is like tiers of intervention. Like if you look at sort of like the SEL, standards, if you will, there's like tiers of intervention, which sound really prescriptive. But I was talking about this with my colleague, Jamie, actually, is that the SEL isn't something that you can just like tag on to the beginning of class or the beginning of a meeting. It's again something that needs to be embodied. It's like, how are you listening to people? How are you showing up? How are you talking to your students? For me, like mindfulness, when I was a teacher, I had so much advice of like, don't smile until Christmas and have a poker face and all these things. And I used to say things like, my student would come late and I would say, you're late. And then after practicing mindfulness, it changed to like, hey, where have you been? Like, coming from an actual place of concern.
Yeah. And I mean, I heard this too, and it was usually coming from the more veteran teachers who have been there and they're kind of just stuck on their ways, not willing to be open to different approaches. So I could definitely tell you a whole bunch of stories on that alone.
Yeah, I think teachers have the best stories.
No, we do. And unless you are in the trenches, it's going to be hard for you to believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, like you really can't make some of these things up. You really can't.
Yes. Yes.
Oh man. So you are in New York, and as you're talking, I know that there is a whole lot going on in New York. I mean, if you haven't been following the news, I mean, you just have. I mean, you'll probably be unaware of what's happening, but it's just been a lot of tuggling, right? Between going back to school and then doing remote learning and going back, just this flip flopping that's been taking place all year long, and it's just perpetuated the trauma that's already been accumulating as a result of COVID-19. So I know you mentioned that you've been able to work with some of the teachers within your city, but I'm thinking about even like your colleagues, because I know you're not in the classroom right now, are you?
No. And I also wanted to just put out there that I left New York in August. So I'm not there currently, but I was there for most of 2020.
Oh wow. So what have you been hearing about that? Because I know, Mayor de Blasio has put out some statements about just remote learning and how things are going to be going moving forward with New York City schools. So I know it's been tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still in communication with a lot of my colleagues that are in New York, and it's just really unpredictable and really stressful.
Yeah. So how do you see 2021 and beyond going? Because we don't know what's going to happen from this point on. I mean, wearing of the mask, this new normal, how long is this going to last? And what kind of impact is it going to continue to have on our education system in general?
Hmm. I feel like you asked me an unanswerable question. How long is it going to last? Ooh, I don't know.
Right.
Hopefully, not too long. But in terms of impact on the education system, I really hope this is a turning point. I really
No,
hope this is a turning point to let go of things that really have not been working for decades, and to really make some change. And going back to like your previous question about, how can mindfulness support our anti-racist, anti-bias practices. I think what I'm really realizing is that the actual practice of mindfulness for students, I know I talked a lot about mindfulness for staff and for adults, but for students, if I can teach a student how to regulate their breathing, how to regulate their nervous system, how to pause and then respond, ultimately, I think that's the most equitable thing I could teach them.
right. And then to add on to your list, how can we get them to self-advocate?
Right. Exactly.
Because there's going to come a time where, you know, Miss Tan's not going to be there, or whoever the teacher is, they're not going to be there to provide those prompts and those reminders to do that. So how do we get our students to self-actualize and to self-advocate for themselves in a way that's going to benefit them, not just in the classroom, but even beyond that, because this is a skill that you need in life.
Right.
Yeah. So how do we get there? That's something that we have to work on, with our students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think continuing to do the good work, to make communities and connections around the good work, and to really just keep advocating for it and living it too, embodying it and living it. So important.
Yes, very much so. And in the midst of all of that, we have to have joy. We have to find joy somewhere in our experience, because there are a lot of things we could be depressed about. And if we don't find the joy in even the littlest of experiences, it's going to be hard. And it's something that's still hard for me as an adult. So I can't imagine how it is for students right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why for the Thriving Teacher Project, this is like a shameless plug, I guess. But
Plug away. This is what it's about.
our last masterclass is going to be about centering joy with Justice Lopez.
Oh,
so, yeah, he's gonna come. He's gonna come with Ryan Parker, who I know was a guest on your podcast
yep.
last month. I think they're gonna talk about joy, play some music, and you're right. It's so important to just get back in our bodies and feel that joy. Actually, before I hopped on this podcast, my older brother came and he was asking me like, "Are you nervous?" And I'm like, "Yes, of course." He's like, "All right, we got to dance," and we put on a song and we danced right before this podcast. So it really makes a difference.
I shout out to your brother for easing your nerves, and then another shout out to Justice and Ryan Parker, who are doing great work with Project Happtivism. If you're not aware of that, please make sure you check them out because they're both awesome. So I know that masterclass is going to be phenomenal. All right, so staying on the topic of joy, let's go into the lightning round.
All right, I'm ready.
Yeah, lightning round. So let's dig deeper and get to know a little bit more about you, Maria. So my first question that I'm asking everybody is, what is your favorite self-care activity during these unprecedented times?
Honestly, I've really found a love for being alone and just spending time with myself, listening to my needs, and slowing down. So that could look like listening to music, some contemplative practices like meditation or journaling, or reading, or just kind of doing nothing, to be honest.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with doing nothing. Nothing brings joy too, because we already do too much as teachers, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I know not too long ago you just mentioned music, dancing with your brother. So I also want to know what's on your playlist these days? What kind of songs do you have, on your playlist, your Spotify or wherever you listen?
So I was listening to the song Happyvism on repeat for a really long time. So definitely that. My favorite artist right now who I've also been listening on repeat, you can find her on Spotify. Her name is The Sundrop Garden, and it's just very melodic, a little bit of soul and R&B, and it's also very ethereal. I love her music, and she's from the Philippines, so it inspires me that one day I can be a famous musician like her. My alternate career.
There you go. For the culture, right? For the culture. No, that's what's up. And can you say her name again?
Yeah, you can search The Sundrop Garden.
The Sundrop Garden. All right. All right. I'm going to definitely take a listen because I'm always looking for new music. So I'll add her to the playlist.
Yes.
All right. 3 people that you can invite to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be? I know.
It's a good question. The Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. I grew up Catholic, and I learned a lot about Jesus, so I would love to meet him. My colleagues are gonna laugh at this one, but this is so serious when I say it. Jaden Smith.
Wow.
Will Smith's son, and here's why. Okay, not only am I a fan of his music, but I also would love to talk about him and his humanitarian efforts. I actually wrote a whole unit on in my biology class about him and what he does with water and what he did with Flint, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And it was our unit about sustainability in the earth. So I would love to pick his brain about what he's up to and, all that good stuff.
No, but Jaden Smith, I mean, I don't really listen to his music. I listen to his dad's music, back when he was a Fresh Prince.
Right.
I'm dating myself. But I do respect his humanitarian efforts. He's done a lot with the water company. And then just helping out with the Flint water situation, which is still in dire need of help.
Right.
Even to this day.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. All right. One book that you are reading right now, if you're reading a book.
Well, I have this book that I'm still working through it, but you're a really good storyteller. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
But another book that I would really recommend to educators is Mindful of Race by Ruth King. Not only is it goes into, systemic oppression, racial injustice, but it also embeds mindfulness, how to use mindfulness as a tool, and it has practices at the end of each chapter. So like really powerful questions. If you're at your school and you want to facilitate racial affinity groups, there's some really awesome practices in there that I highly recommend.
All right. Mindful of Race by Ruth King.
Yes.
All right. I'm checking that out too. In my ever-growing book list. Still growing. All right. One more question before we wrap things up. 3 words to describe your 2020.
Solitary.
Okay.
Transformative.
All right.
And healing.
All right. Wow. Powerful.
Yeah, thank you for that.
All right, and I'll throw a bonus question.
Okay.
3 words that will describe your 2021.
Ooh, empowering, enlivening, and full of love. Guess that's not really 3 words.
That's all right. We'll scaffold that, right? We're teachers,
Thank
right?
you.
We'll bend the rules a little bit for you. That's all good. All right, but Maria, this has just been an incredible conversation. I thank you for coming on to IDTALK4ED Educators Live, and we definitely need to keep this conversation going. But before you go, if you could just share with the audience your social media information so we can continue to support you and to keep track with a lot of thriving teacher project work you're all doing.
Yeah, is there somewhere I can post the link, or do I just...
So what you can do is you can tell me, if you tell me, I can actually go ahead and put it in the comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on Instagram, it's just the Thriving Teacher Project. Also on Facebook, the Thriving Teacher Project. And we have an Eventbrite page.
All right. So make sure you follow Maria on IG, Thriving Teacher Project. And I'll flash it on there for folks to see. There you go. So that is the IG handle. And then you can type that same handle here on Facebook. And let's continue to support. They're doing some great work, and I'm excited to see what 2021 has in store for them. So, so Maria, thank you again for coming on. And if we don't get a chance to connect, I'm wishing you a happy 2020 and happy 2021.
Thank you, Kwame. Likewise, sending energy to you and your family. And thank you so much for having me on here. This was an awesome opportunity, and I look forward to continuing to connect.
Yes, thank you. And you have a good night.
You too.
All right. All right, people. I want to thank you all again for coming on to IDTALK4ED Educators Live. This has been another great show. And for those who are new, once again, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all streaming platforms. We are all over. So until next time, I wish you all a good morning, good night, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace and blessings. Have a great rest of your day.